Ireland's 9/11 and why it matters. When I'm speaking about Ireland's 9/11, I'm referring to the most serious civilian loss of life in the history of the Irish state, perpetrated by terrorists. I'm referring to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings of the 17th of May 1974, 51 years ago. These crimes were committed by terrorists associated with the Ulster Volunteer Force, also known as the UVF, or so we are led to believe. Responsibility was not claimed for almost 20 years. The number of people killed was 34, and 300 people were injured. That figure, as I understand it, refers to people who were physically injured and not people who had lasting psychological and psychiatric difficulties. Nor does it account for the property damage. So there was an immense cost. And you must bear in mind that Ireland is a small country. At the time, it had a population of around 3 million people. Relative to the size of our population, this was as bad as, if not worse than, 9/11. And like 9/11, it was a strike right in the heart of Ireland's largest city. No day of mourning was ever held to mark this tragedy in Ireland. Only 1 year after it took place, people were already referring to it as a forgotten massacre. I was born in the 1990s, and imagine my astonishment when looking at a documentary that took place around the time of my birth on the bombing, and all the way back then, it was being referred to as a forgotten crime, a forgotten massacre, the most serious attack in the history of the state. No one has ever been brought to justice. No one has ever been put on trial or even charged with this offence. The killing of 34 people. This took place when no warning bombs took place in Dublin city centre and also in the provincial town of Monaghan, which is the county town of a border county in the Republic of Ireland. The people who carried out the attacks came from Northern Ireland. You will probably be aware that Ireland, the island of Ireland, is divided into north and south. The north remains part of the United Kingdom. But the reason these attacks are so important to understand is the background and what they say about our system and our media. Because our media has given almost no coverage. It very, very rarely refers to these crimes, and there are other historic crimes in this country that get wall-to-wall media coverage. There is a case almost 30 years old of a French lady called Sophie Toscan de Plantier, who was sadly murdered. This case, even though it's almost 30 years old, receives wall-to-wall media coverage as if it were yesterday. I have nothing but respect for the desire for Ms. Toscan de Plantier's family to get truth, but it's extraordinary that we remember some historical crimes and not others, and some seem to absorb the attention of the media and not others. There has always been a strong suspicion that the British state were complicit in organising the bombing of Dublin and Monaghan on that date. And that's why it has always been particularly sensitive and particularly difficult to get to the truth. After a long number of years, a private inquiry was eventually convened under the Supreme Court Justice Liam Hamilton, and it later transferred to Supreme Court Justice Henry Barron. That was a private inquiry that didn't hold hearings in public, but it is the best that we have had. The conclusion of the private inquiry was that it was likely that members of the British Armed Forces or the British Police Services either were aware of or were involved in the planning of these attacks. To this day, the Irish government is loath to bring up this issue, loath to acknowledge the fact that the neighbouring country, a country with which we share this island, part of the island being under British jurisdiction, could have committed such an attack against us. As talk continues about the possibility of there being a united Ireland, the idea that Northern Ireland would become part of the Republic of Ireland, it is more and more important to understand the lengths to which certain members of the British establishment and security services may go to frustrate that. The context of the Dublin Monaghan bombings was what took place north of the border. There was an attempt to mediate and bring about peace, and the bombings were to a large extent intended to destabilize that, and they were successful in that. So it's very important to understand how elements within the British state would be able to destabilize, and likely would destabilize, a future peace agreement, a future agreement for, well, we don't have a war, but an agreement to bring about Irish unity. It's important to understand that, and to understand the likelihood of that happening, particularly if there is a large cohort of opposition to there being a united Ireland. It's also important because we are now in a period of maybe 5 to 10 years within which there are still going to be some survivors. There are survivors who are still alive, and there are people on the other side who may know stuff about the bombings, who may still be able to come forward or may still be able to be pursued. There is ample circumstantial evidence pointing to British involvement. This includes the fact that the people who are alleged to have carried out the crimes, these people from Ulster known as loyalists, had very limited technical ability, and the bombings bore all the hallmarks of someone with very, very sophisticated technical ability. The 3 Dublin bombs went off bum 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 at just around 90 seconds from each other, which meant that there was pandemonium and chaos. It caused maximum damage. They were designed to cause maximum damage, and they did cause maximum damage, and they meant that once one bomb went off and the emergency services were activated, then they had to contend with another bomb going off. It was expertly carried out. There is testimony from people such as the former army officer Fred Holroyd, who have directly alleged from their own experiences that they understand there was involvement by the British services, and there are suspicious activities by members of the British security services in Dublin on that day. In particular, the activities of 2 British officers in Dublin Port, and also a possible 3rd army officer or ex-army officer, and his activities in the city centre. So it's an unreported or minimally reported event in our history, but it's very important.